Like I said in a previous video, there's a lot to learn by going over Grandmaster games, especially when you know the strategic variables. And in this game, we'll be looking at the middle game strategic variable known as the queenside pawn majority, as well as 6 other fighting and strategic principles. This is a game between Wesley So and Radoslav Wojciechek, who is also a super GM. And Wesley opens with c4, the English opening, which influences the d5 square, one of the 4 sweet center squares, which I'll be repeating time and again because all openings revolve around controlling these 4 center squares. And the main reason for that is that you can't really justify an attack anywhere on the board unless you have some ability to control the center, because an attack up the center is usually faster than any other kind of attack, since pieces have the most freedom of movement there. So the different sorts of openings create different types of pawn structures in the center, which allow different types of attacks to occur. A very complex subject, which I hope to be getting to in other videos. Black responds with knight to f6, knight to f3, e6, opening the bishop, and preparing a d5 push. g3, planning to fianchetto the bishop here along the long diagonal. So what other observations, simple observations, we can make without really knowing the opening well, which I do not? The purpose of openings is to establish a strategic imbalance and quite often a long-range plan right out of the first few opening moves. With this queenside pawn advance, it already suggests possible buildup of forces on the queen side. And when the bishop goes to g2, we will have more influence along the queen side. Black hits that pawn immediately. And there's a slight threat here of pushing d4, preventing the knight from coming to its ideal square. So Wesley plays d4, stops that push, supports the e5 square. Bishop to e7. Do realize there are other moves and sub-variations, and this is just the path these players decided to go down. Bishop to g2. Oh, let's back up a second. And why not just capture this pawn? That's a possibility, and it is another line. And the queen could immediately recapture with a check and capture the pawn. Or there could be a build-up with queen to c2 and then building up on that pawn, and it just creates another variation with complications. Castles, and now queen to c2, which can now recapture this pawn if it decides to capture, among other things. And now he hits the center with c5, castle, and knight to c6. And yes, he could have captured this pawn, leading down another line. Knight would retake, maybe e5. All playable moves. And now we have a threat. There are 2 attackers on this pawn and only 1 defender. So what do? Do you defend it? Do you move it? Do you capture this pawn? Wesley decides to capture. And now if black isn't careful, white's going to establish a queenside pawn majority, which is one of about 10 strategic imbalances which virtually all high-level games revolve around. To justify an attack that has a chance to succeed, you need a true strategic advantage. Converting that advantage to a win, however, is no easy matter. If white can hang on to one of these 2 pawns, he'll have 3 against 2 over here. And Wojo decides to allow that to happen. And this is a very instructional moment. Masters realize that they need to have their own attack plan as well. And by pushing this pawn, black has established 5 against 4 pawns on the king side. They know they just can't wait around for their opponent to realize their strategic advantage. They have to create their own strategic advantage. And pawn majorities are one of those types of strategic variables. And now a3. What's the threat? Is there a threat? Yeah, he's threatening to hang on to this pawn by pushing b4, and black stops that. Now rook to d1, 2 attackers on this pawn, 2 defenders, and black supports it with e5, opening up this bishop. And now we have what I call an anomalous move. The knight's able to go to c3 because of the pin against the queen, the rook. Anomalous moves are a big feature in advanced play. Always look for this possibility as they may appear on the board. or try to set them up. Maybe that's why he moved the rook here, although that's a good place for the rook anyway. So make sure your moves are good whether or not your opponent sees your threat. And now black recaptures the pawn, and the knight slides in to enemy territory. Can black win a pawn here? Why don't you pause the video and think about this for a bit? Okay, when analyzing the board, you always look at what pieces are already being attacked and whether or not they're defended, because that allows you to be creative and imaginative, because sometimes it works out. And everything reduces back to what you learn as a beginner, actually. The basic checkmates, the basic tactics. So if we see the queen is attacking this pawn, and if the knight could come here, and if this knight weren't there, we'd have checkmate on h7. And that's why black can't win a pawn here. If knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes, knight slides in with a discovered attack on the queen by this bishop on g2, and black will either lose the queen or get checkmated on h7. So this is actually another type of anomalous move. Black can't win a pawn, and white advances into enemy territory. Black plays h6, but does that actually stop that mating attack? No, because he'd have one step ahead attacking the queen with the bishop. But it will stop that knight from going there later once that threat is eliminated. And it gives the king Luft in the endgame. Whether or not it's best at this moment would require deep analysis. And now the bishop to d2. Is that a threat? Think about it for a moment. Okay, it actually is. He's threatening to play b4, pawn takes, and he's got the pawn roll that bishop will have to run. And again, he can't really eliminate the knight. So he plays a4, stopping this b4 push with en passant. But remember, every move has a positive and a negative. This pawn has entered enemy territory, and now is a potential target, especially in lieu of the fact that he can't have pawn support here because this pawn is defending that square. So now we have the strategic course of the entire game. All else being equal, white has a queenside pawn majority, and black has a kingside pawn majority. 5 against 4, 3 against 2. And now it's a race to see who can capitalize on their majority first. But there's a known subtle difference between a queenside pawn majority and a kingside one. The queenside pawn majority is actually considered more advantageous, mainly because when we get to an endgame, this king has to travel further to stop the queenside pawns than this king does. And in the meantime, this king can stop the center pawns and then maybe go over here and wipe out these pawns and end up with a passed pawn on the king side. That's the general idea anyway. Easier said than done. And now So plays a forcing move. This is actually a very forcing move. This bishop is undefended. But you need to be careful when you make these engagements against a piece that can also capture you. A lot of mistakes are made there. The bishop is actually pinned. If he runs, the bishop would take the rook. So black captures it with the knight, recapture with the pawn, hitting the bishop. What does the bishop do? Nothing. Wojo throws in an in-between move, a Zwischenzug, as they say in German, or an intermediary move. Always look for in-between moves that might help you get a better position. Without some deep tactical analysis, it's hard to say whether that was best, but a general rule says that you should get men out of your enemy territory, either by trading them or bumping them out. And this does allow white to make the wrong move here and maybe lose a pawn. So which piece do you take? The bishop or the knight? Think about it for a moment. Pause the video. Okay, you take the bishop. Otherwise you lose a pawn. If you take the knight, the bishop can take the pawn. And not only that, but black has the bishop pair now, so it's better to take the bishop for this reason as well. All else being equal. And right now, all else is equal. So he takes the bishop, the knight hits the queen hits the knight, rock, paper, scissors, and knight slides back to c6. And now this pawn is truly weak. And now b4, another anomalous move. The pawn can't take en passant because the rook is undefended. And now the pawns are almost ready to rock and roll. We're going to need to prepare that. Queen to e7, preparing this push, eyeing this pawn should this pawn pushed prematurely. This queen move and black's next move demonstrate another important feature of piece maneuvering. You want your moves to serve multiple purposes. We know the queen has to get off the back rank to unite the rooks, but you also want to prepare a defense and an offense. So this queen has three purposes in its move. And now white plays queen to b2, maintaining the defense of the b pawn and giving room for the remaneuvering of his pieces. But the plan is to build up your forces over here on the queen side and then push these pawns at the right moment. And black needs to do the same on the king side, but he's a little behind in development, so he's losing the race. Bishop hits the knight, X-raying this pawn. As you improve, you calculate what your opponent's plan should be, and then you need to determine whether you should stop it, whether you should delay it, or proceed with your own attack. And quite often this happens simultaneously. My guess is that Wojo already determined that this knight's planning to come here, but he can't do it right away because this pawn would be hanging. If the knight came here, the bishop could grab the pawn. So Wesley goes back to defending the pawn. So clearly that's what this maneuvering was all about. Rook slides over, preparing this little roll of the pawns. The knight continues with its maneuvering to the queen side, defending the c4 pawn. And now the bishop makes itself more useful, hitting the c4 pawn, trying to prepare for the onslaught. And the roll begins. It's the knight. Knight runs. This pawn's undefended. Queen defends it. Now we have two attackers on the a4 pawn, only one defender. f5, continuing with his plan. So now he goes to b3, taking advantage of this anomalous move. Again, the pawn can't take because the rook is undefended. The knight move served two purposes. It now allows the capture of the a4 pawn because before this pawn would still be hanging. Rook takes, queen takes pawn. And now that capture is possible. It also allows the knight to penetrate into enemy territory, hitting this pawn twice with the bishop. So now Wojo went into a deep think and calculated a long variation, but he didn't look quite far enough. He plays knight to d7, and now the knight is hanging because this rook is now defended by the other rook, and the knight is also attacking the c5 pawn. So now we have two attackers on it. So we're back to the same dilemma. And now we have the knight hanging. So if this rook were to take, the rook takes, queen takes, he'd be able to win the c5 pawn. So what do you do as white here? Do you run with the knight? Or do you find your own in-between move? Or do you try to set up an if this, then that scenario so that if your opponent proceeds with his plan, he'll get punished? Always look for the weakness in your opponent's last move, as well as its strength. But this knight move left this pawn undefended. This does require some deep calculation. So Wesley took the pawn, attacking the rook. Now if the pawn takes the knight, we have two attackers on this rook. So he'd actually get a rook for the knight. Bad for black. So black hits the undefended bishop, and now white has two pieces hanging. Pause the video. What would you do? Is white going to lose a piece? You could defend with knight to a5, but Wesley saw another possibility. He played rook takes pawn, black takes the bishop, and there's a little pawn fork here, so he's going to get his piece back. Queen takes, rook takes, and now the rook runs, pawn takes knight, rook takes pawn, rook takes, bishop takes, and it looks like black got out of his troubles. But did he? Pause the video. What would you do as white here? Okay, now it's white who has a chance to win a piece. Rook attacks bishop. Again, this is another type of anomalous move. He's taking advantage of the fact that this pawn is already here on the 7th rank. If the bishop takes the knight, rook slides down, he's going to win the rook or get a queen. So the bishop runs back attacking the pawn, but he's still too late. Rook up, rook takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. Looks okay for black, but it isn't. Pawn up. He's one step behind, and he resigns here because there's no stopping the knight from coming to c5. He's going to win a piece. After that, the bishop will have to lose itself for this pawn, and white will be up a piece and easily win the game. So what 7 things have we learned in this game? 1. The strategic imbalance of the queenside pawn majority versus the kingside majority, and that the queenside majority has a slight advantage. 2. You need to control the center in order to attack anywhere on the board. A lot of players don't realize this. 3. You need to establish your own strategic advantage so you can launch your attack too. 4. Look for anomalous moves. It's a great way for finding moves that you might not have looked for otherwise. 5. Always look for in-between moves. It's one of the key features for jousting and outplaying your opponent. 6. Prepare your defense. If you don't prepare your defense in advance, you'll be too late to do it later. 7. Punish your opponent with an if this, then that scenario. That's another large area where you can find moves which not only further your plan, but punishes your opponent should he proceed with his own. Anyway, I hope this was useful for you. These are things I wish I knew 25 years ago. Please subscribe and thumbs up, and talk to you later.